This is CFO Talks, and my name is Kieran Ryan. Today, we're really excited to be joined by Lorien Gamaroff, CEO of Centbee, a cryptocurrency payment company. He's also the chief executive of Banky Moon, a consulting company in the blockchain space. Blockchain is the technology that powers Bitcoin and 1,000 more cryptocurrencies, though this is just one of the applications of this new technology. Blockchain may well represent the next step in our business and technological evolution. It allows two people who don't know each other to transact safely. Whenever one discusses blockchain, there are a few mind-bending concepts one has to understand, such as what is a distributed ledger. That basically means that there's no centralized system of record keeping for the transactions. These transactions are stored in hundreds or even thousands of locations, making it theoretically immune from hacking. But we're going to explore that in a minute with our guest, Lorien Gamaroff. So we're delighted to be joined by Lorien, CEO of Centbee. Welcome, Lorien.
Thank you very much for having me.
Sure. Can we kick off by talking about your background in business and how you got onto this path of consulting and developing businesses focused around blockchain?
Well, in the last 20 years, I've done a lot of work for all sorts of organizations, financial organizations. Also, I was involved in a media company, a startup, when social media was becoming a thing, and also the energy industry, building payment systems for smart grids and so on. So it's always been something that I've been interested in, payments. Also, I was born in Zimbabwe, and when the 2008 financial crisis hit, and just prior to that, the Zimbabwe dollar collapsed, it sort of set me up to be very open to the idea of a decentralized currency.
Oh, so you're a Zimbabwean. Where did you go to school?
I went to school in South Africa. I moved here when I was very young, but still have family and roots there.
Oh, yeah. I also grew up there. I went to St. George's College in Harare.
Yes, my father taught there.
He did?
Mm-hmm.
What did he teach?
I would imagine French, I think.
Oh, really?
Perhaps, or
Well, our French teacher was Mrs. Hill.
Okay.
Okay. Let's skip on to the next one. Talk about blockchain itself. Can you describe in simple terms what it is and why people are so excited about it?
Yes, in the simplest terms, all it is just a database, a kind of spreadsheet that is spread across the world that no central organization controls. That's it in a nutshell.
Nobody controls it. Okay, so it's beyond the reach of the central banks. This is why so many libertarians and people who are concerned about the highly centralized control that we have over the financial system are excited by blockchain and what it actually means. You're taking control out of the hands of central banks and authorities, and basically you're putting it into the hands of who?
Right. So, yes, that was the idea around the cryptocurrency Bitcoin. It was a sort of reinvention of the sound money concept, where we have a limited supply of some sort of commodity, and that can be used as money. And that certainly is where things originated from. But the blockchain itself has a lot more use cases that could be applied. If we think about the internet, I guess the original idea was just to share bits of information, perhaps emails. And now what we have is we've got video streaming and social media and so on. So there is an aspect of that, a crucial aspect. You know, of course, it doesn't necessarily take the control away from central banks. It just reintroduces the concept of a fixed commodity that central banks may or may not in the future link a currency to.
Okay, so we have Bitcoin, which is a cryptocurrency. Do you own some Bitcoin?
Yes, I do.
Okay, yeah. It relies on the blockchain technology, right? And Bitcoin and many other cryptocurrencies out there are just one application of blockchain. What are some of the other uses?
So a lot of people are, and for the last 10 years, this has been the big quest, is to try and find a use case that can come and transform or change or enable new sorts of activity. And a lot of companies out there are trying all sorts of things. One of the things that seem very likely is that we already have securities like shares and bonds and so on. And it would be quite easy to link a share in the same way that we have dematerialized shares at CSDs. Well, perhaps now...
Sorry, what is CSDs?
Central Securities Depositories.
Okay.
That is where if you had a share in a company, the registration of that share or the certificate would be held at an organization like a CSD, and we have two main ones in South Africa.
And those are Straight and?
Straight and I forget the name of the other
another one. Okay.
There's a newish one that's come along.
Right.
And so what would happen is if you owned a share in a company, you would then have a certificate that was dematerialized, in other words, digitized at that company, and they would hold it. And if I wanted to sell a share, then what I would do is I'd go through an exchange, a stock exchange. We'd do a trade, and then the securities depository would actually then change the ownership of that share from me to you. And that's quite a long process. It takes a few days, and there's costs involved, of course. So the idea around blockchain was that perhaps what we can do is we can actually create a share that is on a blockchain, and it becomes a record on this ledger. And then you and I can exchange it in a peer-to-peer way from me to you without having to go through any central intermediaries and avoid all the costs and all the time that comes with that in the settlement and the clearing. And that has been a very interesting, exciting avenue in terms of how blockchain has evolved over the last few years. And then there's a lot of other things, the potential for escrow perhaps to be changed and transformed.
And we better just define what escrow means for people who don't know that.
If you think about if I wanted to buy something from you, but I didn't trust you and you didn't trust me to pay you if you delivered the goods, then what we would do is we would get a third party that we mutually trusted third party between us. And what we would do is we would make sure that they know that the terms of the contract, so they know that you want to deliver me something and I'm going to pay you X for that. And if the transaction occurs, if I delivered the goods, then what will happen is instead of giving you the money prior to the exchange, I would give the money to the escrow agent. Then the escrow agent is holding it. And if you do deliver the goods, the escrow agent would then say, yes, the goods have been delivered, and then hand you the money. So what it does is it just introduces a trusted third party to make sure that the terms of the agreement are fulfilled. Now, with Bitcoin and blockchain, it is possible to create what's called a smart contract. And a smart contract would be something that could have the terms of that agreement. Maybe this amount of goods needs to be delivered on this date. And then what would happen is I would be able to send the money to the contract itself. So I actually deposit the money into the contract, which sits on the blockchain. And then you'd be able to see the money sitting inside the contract. And then if you were to deliver the goods, perhaps there would be somebody or something out there checking that the goods were received in good order. And then the payment would come to you directly without anybody having to actually hold that money and release it to you. So this is another thing that could potentially become a good use case.
You can just imagine lawyers will be fighting that because they love these kind of things where there are contested contracts.
Yes, the idea here is to not really eliminate lawyers, but certainly to make the whole process more efficient. There are so many costs involved, so much paperwork, so many delays, and so on. And if we were to be able to digitize this in a safe, secure environment that couldn't be corrupted, especially when it comes to contracts. If you want to create a contract, you want to ensure that the contract is set in stone. And this is one way of doing it, where we can create it on a blockchain. We both have access to it. We both can see it because blockchains by nature are transparent. And then we can enter into the agreement. So I think that the blockchain won't necessarily disintermediate, in other words, remove these middlemen, lawyers, and so on, but certainly is going to make things a lot more efficient.
Right, because, there's so many aspects of a contract that can be disputed. Did you deliver it at 12 o'clock on Tuesday as you promised to do, or, was it 5 past? And is that something that, we can claim a discount for, that kind of thing? I have heard that before, the smart contract idea and the way that it would smooth commerce. If it runs like that, and frankly, you would have to remove a lot of those areas where there could be a dispute. You would have to remove that from the equation. But I do see that as quite a fascinating development. Can we just change subjects here a little bit? In a recent article in Brainstorm, you talk about being invited to Zimbabwe, which is in the midst of the worst financial crisis in years. And it's been through many of those. People, it seems, want out of the financial system that they're confronted with in Zimbabwe. And I quote you here. You don't have to spend more than 5 seconds with them, you're talking about Zimbabweans here, explaining that Bitcoin is decentralized. There's a limited supply and no one controls it. They got so excited, the whole room was buzzing. It was like a religious ceremony. All right, you better explain why Zimbabweans are so excited about blockchain and how do you see it rescuing the country from financial ruin? Is that possible?
I think it is possible. That was an event that was held, a 5-day workshop, and it was open to the public. And the whole idea there was to explain these concepts. But I have been back subsequently and even presented and workshopped with the Reserve Bank there. At first, they were quite open to this idea of cryptocurrency, but now, of course, they've become a little bit more reserved, and so they're not so eager. This is the regulators there right now. But of course, from the point of view from the people, we can see what a disaster the currency has been, and now we're going through this issue with bond notes, and even they are going through inflation. There's a big issue with people who are trying to buy things. They're trying to import and they're trying to export, and it's very difficult to get money in and out of Zimbabwe. So this is now certainly a potential something that can really alleviate the strain and the stress that people have there in terms of how do we get money in and out of the country. Not to say that this is about capital flight. This is just about industry and commerce and trade and so on. So that's from the business perspective. But from the general person in the street, they've had their currency destroyed. They've seen it in their lifetime.
And their life savings destroyed.
Life savings destroyed, pension funds. My grandfather had a pension that was eventually worth nothing, and it cost him more to draw it than what it was worth. So they are very open to the idea of money that is not tied to a central bank that can artificially or arbitrarily inflate and so on. They've felt it acutely. So I think that given the opportunity, cryptocurrency will certainly thrive. And also, if you think about Zimbabweans, they're very used to mobile money. They use a lot of eco-cash.
Yes.
In fact, I think the number is 98% of transactions go through mobile money. So they're very used to the idea of money on a mobile device and being able to transact. In fact, retailers accept it, and they can pay their bills and they can pay their school fees. So the idea of Bitcoin, which is the same thing as mobile money to them, but not tied to a central bank, and that is global. So they can send money to their family, for example, if Zimbabweans living in South Africa here, it would be very convenient and very cost effective for people working in Zimbabwe to be able to send money home. And so the opportunity is great in terms of rescuing Zimbabwe from this situation that it can't seem to really escape.
Right. I recently spoke to Eddie Cross. He's a parliamentarian from South Bulawayo on this whole point. The problem that you have there, and I think you mentioned bond notes. So I think we probably just need to explain by way of background. You are able to transact with US dollars. You are able to transact with South African rands. But you have this other thing called the bond note. And that's the one that is controlled by the central bank, and therefore that's the one that's open to manipulation. And it used to be a bond note was, I think, equivalent to $1.
That's right. That's the idea. It's supposed to be fixed.
But it's now at about a third. So
not officially.
Not officially on the black market.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you have basically a black market there. But if you've got cash, you've got rands, and you've got US dollars, you can transact. You're a king in Zimbabwe. As soon as you enter into the bond note market, you're basically dealing on the black market there. So I guess Zimbabweans see here an opportunity for who created this mess. Clearly, it's the regulators. It's the central bank, because I believe that is the Reserve Bank allocation there is controlled by the party loyalists. And I think the people on the street there want to see that removed from them. Blockchain and cryptocurrencies could be the way out, right?
I certainly think so. But just to touch on this idea of cryptocurrencies in general, they're not all equal. When it comes to this idea of cryptocurrency, there's a lot of people out there who are still sort of pushing this idea that there will be a multi-currency world. There's a lot of high-profile, prominent pundits, who are all pushing their idea of what a cryptocurrency should be. Even what we see today is that Bitcoin itself went through multiple splits. The communities actually were divided on how a cryptocurrency should work. And what we see now is a whole plethora of different currencies all trying to serve some particular ideology. We see that some cryptocurrencies are trying to be anonymous cash systems, which frankly will never work, will never be allowed. And also just will never be accepted, because when you have a cash transaction, when you make a payment, you want the ability to trace that payment. Privacy is extremely important, but anonymity is never going to work, not from a merchant's perspective, not from a consumer's perspective. And then we have other cryptocurrencies that are trying to enable the ability to have anonymous marketplaces. A very famous case was the Silk Road back a couple of years ago. And this is really what got everybody interested in these things called cryptocurrencies. So I don't believe that there is going to be multitude of cryptocurrencies. I think that the cryptocurrencies and potentially cryptocurrency, if there's only going to be one, is going to have to fit within a legal and regulatory framework. We're not talking about Zimbabweans, trying to escape the system and escape the legal framework. What we need to do is make sure that the cryptocurrency that serves a country or a community at least toes the line with existing legal frameworks. And what we see now is there are actually a few versions of Bitcoin that have deviated from the original design of Bitcoin, which was defined in the white paper by the pseudonymous inventor Satoshi Nakamoto. And we see now how that Bitcoin itself has changed and transformed. We have now Bitcoin BTC, which is
it's Bitcoin Cash, right?
We've got Bitcoin BTC, we've got Bitcoin Cash, we now have Bitcoin SV, although Bitcoin SV is the original design. So what we're going to need to also be sure of, if we're going to be excited about these currencies, is do they fit within a legal and regulatory framework? And in fact, I spend a lot of time, even with the Reserve Bank of South Africa and the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, explaining to them that there are certain cryptocurrencies, very few in fact, that actually can be regulatorily compliant in terms of KYC and anti-money laundering.
And KYC means know your customer.
Knowing your customer, because that's a very important thing as a business. It's a requirement. You need to know your customer. Anti-money laundering, you need to be able to know the source of funds, and if there are dodgy-looking transactions, if there's a lot of money moving backwards and forwards. So what we've been doing is at Centby is creating these payment systems based on the original design of Bitcoin, which is now Bitcoin SV, and going to our regulators and saying, we can now apply the correct know your customer rules, the correct anti-money laundering, and that is how we're going to be able to bring a cryptocurrency into the country. And in South Africa, we're very lucky with our regulators. They're very educated, and also have this idea that if there's this is a technology that can provide a benefit to people and consumers, not necessarily to a currency that a consumer can use to escape the central bank, because as a regulator, the central bank wants oversight into transactions. If we can provide the assurance that the cryptocurrency we use is compliant, then we're going to see growth, and we're seeing it in South Africa today. Now, in terms of Zimbabwe, that's a message that still needs to be told. It's not going to be that every cryptocurrency will exist and every cryptocurrency will be used, but there are, there's a particular one, the original Bitcoin. I think that will become something that can be legally compliant, fit within a regulatory framework, that central banks, even though it's not that they are issuing that currency and have control of the issuance, they at least have oversight as to how it is moving.
Okay, can we talk for a minute about your financial background and your training? You're the chief executive of Ban Ki-moon, but you're also an entrepreneur and the chief executive of Centby. So that covers quite a lot of ground professionally. Do you have an accounting background? How did you get on this path?
I actually don't have an accounting background, and I'm not a finance expert, although I have become one, I guess, over the last 10 years of being involved with Bitcoin, because that's how long it's been. It was Bitcoin really that got me interested in money and, what money is. I think that a lot of us don't really ever to have a thought to what money is, where does it come from, and where does the value arise. And so having built many payment systems, having been involved with financial organizations building systems for them, because that's actually my background as a software engineer building these systems. It's been a very important thing, especially as a founder of Ban Ki-moon, trying to push this idea and explain this idea of Bitcoin and what makes it money and why it can be used as a financial asset and why it can be used as payments, as a payment system. It's been very important for me to get to the roots of money.
I think there's been a big discussion amongst economists, and I've seen some. I also have, done some cryptocurrency buying myself. There's been a lot of discussion amongst economists, what actually is money? And that is a good question. There are some who would say it has to be backed by some physical commodity like gold or silver. Others say, no, it's really just an idea backed by confidence. You have to have confidence in and trust that what you're using has got value. What's your view on that?
Well, that falls short of the big idea that as a store of value, there must be some way to redeem that value. I think somebody who says that money is just a confidence game, well, then you're just talking about it being a con game. And that's what con is short for, confidence. The idea that this is just this collective delusion that we have and that this money has value, that I think falls short of the mark. Yes, of course, money throughout history has always been linked to or actually consisted of some kind of commodity that had value. And we've had all sorts of money in the past. We've had gold and silver, but we've had all sorts of other things. And then even money that we have today, fiat currency, once upon a time was linked to some sort of commodity. And of course, in 1971, the world finally went off and delinked it from gold. But that's really been a big experiment. We live in a financial experiment for the last 40-odd years. And I think that when you look around the world and you see how governments, through their own fault or through fault of whatever's going on, just tend to not rein themselves in and give into the they're given to the temptation of being able to print money as a source of funds. If you think about governments, they're just like people. How do they raise money? Either through taxation or through borrowing. But governments, of course, now having a currency like a fiat currency, which is just a currency that's not linked by anything, can now go and artificially create money, creating inflation and therefore creating a hidden tax. So
I think it's a commonly misunderstood thing that inflation is actually caused by governments. How do they do that? They do that through borrowing.
Yes, the prices going up is not inflation. Inflation is the expansion of the money supply.
Rising prices is a consequence of that. Yeah,
correct. So what we've seen now over the last few decades is a radical inflation around the world. If you look at money supplies, there's a great website I always look at called tradingeconomics.com. And you can actually see how countries around the world have been hyperinflating their currencies. And someone might ask, well, where's the price inflation? Well, look at the asset market, look at property market, and so on.
That's right. They call that the Kantian effect. The very first sign of inflation is going to be in asset prices, in stock prices, in property prices. You're only seeing that on the grocery shelf months later. So it trickles down very, very slowly.
Yes, but it eventually does.
Yeah.
So this idea of going back to a commodity-based money, and Bitcoin is a commodity-based money. It's not something that has value because of this collective delusion. It actually has value. The value is being able to create records on this general ledger, this distributed ledger that can then be used for verification and authentication. So the commodity aspect of Bitcoin comes from this usefulness of as a ledger where we can all pay a miner to insert a record that becomes immutable. It's something that cannot be changed, and can also create the ability to digitize or tokenize assets, and then those assets can then, the ownership can be transferred. So what we have is we've got a very useful system here, and of course to use that system we need to pay to use that system. How do we pay to use that system? We need to acquire the token of that system, the cryptocurrency, and that creates a supply and demand dynamic.
As CEO of Ban Ki-moon and Centby and an entrepreneur, what are the issues that keep you up at night, if anything at all? Is it making payroll, balancing the books, or is it something far more fundamental to the business?
Well, what keeps me up at night is this all going to work? Are we, in fact, just deluded, us as a cryptocurrency blockchain enthusiasts? Is this such a thing that can prevail and can change the world, or is it something that is just a pipe dream and perhaps will never work if governments don't allow it? So it's exciting right now. We're lucky to have foreign investors, and they are as enthusiastic as we are. But of course, we haven't seen this in the world today. I think there's a lot of speculation and no real uses right now. Of course, we have potential uses, but we're certainly trying to change that. We're creating a payment system. Centby is a Bitcoin payment system. We have vouchers, we've got cross-border remittance products, we've got merchant payment systems, and we certainly hope to change the world. We think we can, and we think we have something valuable.
And so these payment systems, are they currently in use?
They are not at the moment. There are some payment systems that are in use, but not generally. For example, no large retailers. The reason for that is because it's very difficult to introduce a new payment system into a large a retailer like a Pick and Pay or Woolworths. So what we're trying to do right now is we are doing a lot of research into how to integrate Bitcoin payments into existing points of sale. And that's a complex thing because, those are really well defined. We're talking about card payment rails and so on. But what we are finding is that we have a payment wallet. We've got a wallet. So Centbee is a Bitcoin wallet. We've now just in South Africa released a voucher product where you can go to any retailer. You can go to Pick and Pay. You can go to Checkers, you can go to Pep, and you can actually buy Bitcoin over the counter with cash or with credit card or with SnapScan. So if somebody wants to go and buy Bitcoin SV, the original version of Bitcoin, go for it, give it a try. Download Centbee and try it. And then we're about to release our cross-border remittance product.
So do you have to get regulatory buy-in before you can get acceptance of these remittance products?
Yes, we've been working very closely with our regulators. They know everything we're doing. We're very transparent. We're doing a bit of self-regulation in terms of the Know Your Customer rules. So we do put limits into how much you can purchase, how much per day and how much per month. And we also obviously track the users. We require some in-user information, so ID number and so on. So we're looking at Bitcoin as a financial product. And so my partner, Angus Brown, he was one of the founding members of eBucks. He's very well respected in the community and understands these things very well. And so his great insight is also coming to bear, where we are trying to fulfill the same obligations that a typical payment company would have.
Right. So let's just talk very briefly about the future. Where do you see blockchain in 5 years?
I think blockchain is going to consolidate as a concept. I don't think we're going to have a plethora of blockchains. I think that just like we have one single internet, we're going to have one single blockchain. That blockchain will be the one that doesn't have anonymity built in. It doesn't have the ability to create anonymous marketplaces, and that really narrows it down to the existing, the original version of Bitcoin, which is now traded on exchanges as BSV. I think that there'll be a single currency on that blockchain as Bitcoin. And I certainly see a lot more payment companies, a lot more merchants, financial products around Bitcoin. But then, of course, this idea of having an internet that is going to be based around this blockchain. So being able to pay people for information, pay companies for streaming, and so on. I think it'll all be around that blockchain.
Right. I noticed, by the way, that quite a few South Africans have achieved prominence in the cryptocurrency space, in the blockchain space. Why is that?
Well, I think that we have a unique place down here at the bottom of Africa. We have a wonderful environment. We've got a very developed country in terms of the financial system itself and the infrastructure. But we have countries like Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Malawi, Kenya. We've got all these African countries that seem to, first of all, have a lot of people here in South Africa trying to move money cross border. We all saw what happened in 2008 with Zimbabwe. I think that it's just that right mix. We see a continent above us with a lot of problems, that can be solved with Bitcoin. A lot of entrepreneurs here. South Africa is very interesting in terms of blockchain interest. If you just typed into trends.google.com, you type the word Bitcoin, you're going to see that South Africa is consistently ranked number one as the country with the most interest around Bitcoin.
Is that right?
Yes. So South Africa, I think, is going to be a key country going forward in the future in terms of this idea.
Wow. Okay. Last thing, 2 books that you would recommend.
Around the subject, because I can recommend
even if it's just, for leisure.
Well, a good book is The Death of Money, Jim Rickards.
Oh, yes.
Yes. I think that's very eye-opening.
Yeah, and don't they call him the currency, the prophet of apocalypse or something like that?
Yes, he's very focused on.
He's been in South Africa. I think he's come here and he's given talks. Yeah.
Yes, exactly, and he also.
So the name of that book again?
It's The Death of Money.
The Death of Money by Jim Rickards.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then there's a Niall Ferguson book called, I think it's The Ascent of Money. And that also just talks about the history of money and where it's how we got to the point that we have today. It's also a very insightful book.
Right. What influences, what kind of people do you admire or have inspired you?
Certainly over the last 10 years, having been involved with Bitcoin, I now find that economics is very interesting to me, especially the Austrian view of economics, where we have sound money. Also, that kind of libertarian thing where we don't have no government. I'm not an anarchist, but we have less government, smaller government. I'll admit that I'm not a socialist. I'm a capitalist. I think that a free market capitalism is very important for growth and for development. So that's sort of what has happened over the last 10 years, all because of Bitcoin and, having to go to the root of what is money, what is government, and so on.
So in terms of personalities, are you talking there about Ludwig von Mises and
Murray Rothbard,
Friedrich Hayek
yes,
and Murray Rothbard and people like that?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you very much, Lorien, for that. That was Lorien Gamaroff, Chief Executive Officer of Centby and Ban Ki-moon.